oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Hi, my name is Brian Drake. I live in Northeastham, Massachusetts. I've lived here since 1973.
So how did you end up on Cape Cod?
Well, my mother and my stepfather had a real estate business. And I was waiting to go into the Federal Bureau of Investigation as an agent. I had done all the interviews, and it took them too long to respond. So I decided to stay here, even though about 6 months after I made that decision, they did call me and offer me a position, subject to going to their school. But I had one child at the time, and I had an opportunity to buy a business, so I decided to stay in Cape Cod.
So how did you become interested in joining the military?
Well, when I was young, to be perfectly candid, I was an average student in high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So my stepfather suggested to me, well, if you don't know what you want to do, why don't you think about joining the military and get a career doing something like that. So ultimately, a couple months later, in March of 1961, I enlisted in the service with the United States Air Force, and decided that they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, being a policeman or a cop sounded like a pretty good idea. Give people tickets, I'm like 18. So I decided to apply and become an air policeman, which I did.
What were your family and friends' reactions to you enlisting in the military?
I really didn't have, I think my mom, my father died when I was 15 suddenly, and I think my mom, after she met my stepfather, was relieved that I was going to try and make the best of my life. And some of my friends did the same thing. They told me that sounded like a good idea. But I've always been one who makes up his own mind as what he wants to do and what I believe is in my best interest.
Okay. What were you most afraid of going into the war?
Well, before I went into the war, so to speak, in Vietnam, I was in the military for a while. When I became an air policeman, I decided I liked that, and over progression between then and the time that I went into Vietnam in 1967, I was able to go from an air policeman to an air police investigator, and eventually went to Washington, D.C. and became a special agent with the Office of Special Investigations, which is a Air Force felony type investigative system, and I did counterintelligence as well.
And which of those jobs did you enjoy the most?
Well, they both were very attractive to me. When I decided to volunteer to go to Vietnam, I wanted to get experience so I could apply to the FBI. It was a personal thing that I wanted to do for my interest, but also to serve my country at the time. And so I volunteered to go to Vietnam, and they also offered me if I wanted to go to language school, that I could do so. So I went to the Defense Language Institute in California and learned how to speak Vietnamese before I went.
Can you please describe an average day for you during the war?
Well, my particular objective that I was given was, if you know anything about counterintelligence work, my job was to protect, for the most part, the base that I was at, which was in the Central Highlands, a place called Phan Rang Air Base. My duty was to report through our main office in Saigon, up and through into Washington, D.C., but most importantly, to the base commander, because my job was to infiltrate certain villages around the base where I was at, so that I would protect the assets of the air base, which consisted of F-100 fighter planes that went up to bomb North Vietnamese targets. So we were very concerned of what we called back then sapper attacks, which means the VC would break through onto the base and try and blow up our planes. So my objective, my sole objective, and the fact that I spoke Vietnamese, was to protect those assets of the base by gathering information from local national sources, whether they be Montagnards or South Vietnamese people who lived in the villages around the base. And to my surprise, it was a very effective way of protecting the assets of the base, and nothing ever happened negatively to those assets.
Can you describe some of the relationships you made during the war?
Yes, most of the relations I have, due to the fact that I was speaking Vietnamese, I don't know by the name, that was quite a while ago, but I made friends with a lot of local nationals, including the sources because you have to develop trust between the people that I'm gathering information from, that they know that they can trust me and I can trust them. Some of these sources were paid sources. Most of them were, as I said, paid sources, but not all of them. Some were friends. So, but being in Vietnam only a year and a half, some of those friendships obviously disappeared after I left, and I don't know what's happened to those people since I've been back after I left there in 1969.
Was it challenging learning a new language?
Yes, especially Vietnamese, because it's a very tonal language. If I were to address you now, I would say "Chào cậu, cậu bình nhoi không," but that means "How are you?" and to a young lady. If you were my friend, and I would say "Chào em" instead of "Chào cậu." So all that was difficult, but I went to school for 47 weeks. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, to learn that language.
If you could, would you like to see the people you met in war again?
Oh, absolutely. But being my age now, I'm 77, 50 years have almost gone by, and I don't know how many of them survived, because as you know, I don't want to say we lost the war, but we decided to leave prematurely. So a lot of those people who helped Americans were either assassinated or imprisoned or put in a place where they challenged these people to become more of the philosophy of the communist government than it was like we had a democratic government.
Could you describe your happiest moment during the war?
Well, I don't know if there was a happy moment. I think that for me, as not out in the woods exchanging fire with Viet Cong and North Vietnamese people, I would say that most of the time I was in the environment that I was very challenged, very happy to be there to help my country. And so I don't know if there was any particular moment that made me happy. I guess when I was awarded the Bronze Star, that was something that was important.
Yeah. When you hear the word Vietnam, what first comes to mind?
A beautiful country.
What are some important lessons you learned from your service?
From the service in general, or my trip in Vietnam?
Service in general.
Well, in service in general, I learned discipline. I learned that when you set a goal and you meet that goal, that's very refreshing to your soul. I remember I was being very proud, although history has told us that perhaps maybe we shouldn't have gone to Vietnam, that at the time I feel like I was doing something that was beneficial to my country. Overall, I served 10 and a half years in the Air Force. I was able to spend some time prior to Vietnam in New York City doing background checks on people for security clearances. After I left Vietnam, I went to Germany and spent 3 years in Germany doing counterintelligence and criminal work, which I found very rewarding, and it really helped me be accepted by the FBI, because normally they wanted accountants and lawyers, but they liked the experience that I brought to the table. But unfortunately, I have second thoughts. I wish sometimes I did do that, but I decided to stay on Cape Cod and start a career here in the insurance business.
Could you tell us more about the Bronze Star Award?
Well, the Bronze Star was not for, let's say, being in combat, that type of thing. It was for what I did at Phan Rang Air Base when I was in Vietnam. And I was awarded that for the work I did collecting counterintelligence information to give to my base commander and the Saigon office, as well as all that information was sent to Washington, D.C. And they call that intelligence report.
At any point during your service, were your morals ever challenged or called to question?
Well, that's a very good question. Anytime you're in a situation like that, you could be, but fortunately for me, I was not, because I had very strict guidelines in what I was supposed to do, and I was never faced with having to kill somebody, although I always carried a weapon. I worked closely with the Central Intelligence Agency. They had an office downtown from where I was. They I don't want to get into too much detail, but they had a certain mission that involved going to villages at night and doing certain things that I really don't want to discuss. But that would be the only moral confrontation I would have had I gone on any kind of mission with them.
Did carrying a weapon make you feel safer, or did you feel you could have gone without it?
Oh, I always carried a weapon. No, that was no question. In fact, I carried two. I carried a concealed pistol just in case, I didn't want to look. I wasn't in a uniform when I was there. I never wore a uniform. Most of my time spent in the Office of Special Investigation as a special agent was in civilian clothes. When I was in Vietnam, my only concern was being captured, because without any how do I want to say, identification, like I was a captain or a sergeant or anything like that, I was not subject to the Uniform Code of, I was not subject to protection as a military soldier. So I would say that my time spent I was always nervous, and I always carried a pistol, and by the times when I had my own Jeep, I would go downtown and carry an M16 or some kind of rifle to protect myself if necessary.
Did you ever come close to being captured?
I can't tell you that, but I can tell you one night I was driving from the base downtown to see a few of the CIA agents, and I had a couple of people in my Jeep, and I got next to a building called Juhoi, which is a place where they repatriated VC to try and bring them over to our side. And I got right next to the building and it blew up. So I don't know if I hit a tripwire or it had to be a coincidence when I got there. But to be perfectly frank, I was more concerned about the local soldiers that were there, like a policeman, that they would shoot us because they thought maybe we had done it. But that's probably about the closest that I know of that I came to being in any significant danger.
What were you feeling after that scenario happened?
Well, if I can be as candid as I would like to be, I don't know if I want to say this, but when we got down to the CIA headquarters there in town, we sat down, had a few drinks, and talked about what happened, and we then left and came back, and as we passed coming back to the base, we ran into a MACV, which is Military Air Command Vietnam patrol, and they suggested that we get out of there and get back to the base.
What were some of your hardships during the war?
Well, hardships obviously are being away from the country that you love, and the conditions and the environment were not conducive to what we're used to. I lived in a bachelor office quarters, so we would go to I could join any club, the Airmen's Club, the NCO Club, or the Officers Club. And I would say that the conditions off the base were, I mean, I remember sitting down with some Vietnamese people on a dirt floor with a pot of soup in front of us eating, and they don't have any electricity. So they were way behind where were in the United States at the time in terms of living conditions.
Are there any major differences between Vietnamese people and American people, like their personalities, that you notice?
That's another good question. The people that I met, whether they be just regular local nationals, not involving me asking them to be part of my intelligence network, but just ordinary people that I met on the base or that I would meet downtown when I went down to eat once in a while, they were wonderful people. A little bit on the lazy side, if I might ask, and that's not unusual in the Orient or other places, that these people would, even from the war, would take a siesta from 12 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Even the North Vietnamese did the same thing. But no, they're wonderful people, and I met a number of Montagnards who were an ethnic group that the Vietnamese people didn't get along with so much. There was a lot of prejudice going back and forth, and they ate betel nut, and so every time you would talk to them, their mouth would be all red and their teeth would be red. But they were wonderful people also, and they loved Americans. So for the time that I spent at Phan Rang, I got to know quite a few of them, both Montagnards and Vietnamese people, and for the most part, they were wonderful people.
Where did you stay and sleep during your time in Vietnam?
Well, a couple of places. When I first got to Vietnam, I was in Saigon. I'd like to briefly tell you a story, if I may. When I first got there, I had a sponsor that sponsored me before I got there, so I'd have somebody to communicate about what to expect. So he, when we got into the Jeep at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, he said, "Now I want you to do a couple of things. I want you to be aware that the streets are very crowded," and they are. There's bicycles, three-wheel bicycles, taxi cabs, all different types of cars and vehicles. So when you stop at a stoplight, okay, there's a lot of people around you. So he said, "Now, listen, when somebody throws a grenade in the Jeep, all you have to do is pick it up and throw it out." Okay, so I didn't know what to expect. So I'm looking around as I go downtown. But our office was in downtown Saigon for the first 3 months that I was in Vietnam before I went to the Central Highlands. And I lived in a little apartment, if you want to call it maybe just a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom type of unit, not like we have here. But I shot a spider that was this big off a wall using like a BB gun almost, we use for target practice. And one time there was, when you turn on the sink, the water would run down this little V thing and go into a ditch. And we would have these cockroaches that were about this size. So I made a mistake and I sprayed where the cockroaches were, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them came out from below into our quarters. So those are some of the humorous things. But I lived downtown. I was also came down to attend a court martial for a guy that I investigated for money laundering there, and I was walking down the street in the beginning of February of 1968, and that was the start of the Tet Offensive. And I didn't know that. Tet is spelled T-E-T. That was when the Saigon was attacked by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. I thought it was, the Tet is like our 4th of July. So I'm walking down the street and I hear all these things, bombs going off and stuff like that. And it was not friendly, okay? So ultimately I made it to my office, and I was stuck in there for 3 days, okay? And we watched an amazing thing. The building was 3 stories high, and we went up in the top balcony, and you could hear the bullets going all over the place. And American gunships were coming in and shooting rockets into buildings, and they were blowing up and all this kind of, this is downtown Saigon. So it was, we were, fortunately, because I spoke the language, there was only maybe a couple American Air Force guys that spoke Vietnamese. So fortunately, I was able to communicate and understand what was going on, and I could fill in the other people in the office at the time.
Would you say your living conditions were better or worse than the average Vietnamese citizen?
Oh, from when I'm on base, when I was at Phan Rang, our living conditions, I mean, I had an Akai tape recorder. It was just like being in America on the base. You know, we had I lived in a BOQ, that's Bachelor's Office Quarters, what that stands for. And I had the two other OSI agents with me that we stayed in there. And I'm probably the closest you mentioned before about having a problem. I remember one night we were mortared. I could hear him getting closer and closer and closer. So we got under our beds and put the mattress up over, but it stopped before it got to us.
Did you keep any tokens from Vietnam that you brought home?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I did, but right now I wasn't prepared for that question. So nothing necessarily from Vietnam that I can think of, but I mean, other than the records I kept about my performance and how good or bad it was.
At what age did you leave Vietnam?
Well, that's a good question. I left in January 1969, so that meant I was born in 41, so you do the math. I guess I was in my mid-20s.
Leaving the war, what were you feeling?
Well, I think one of the things that sticks out, and it's a very sad thing that sticks out in my mind, is that when I was at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, my first 3 months, when I was in downtown Saigon, I remember the silver coffins. I remember these long flatbed trucks with silver coffins stacked 3 high, and the smell of formaldehyde. Sorry, that's tough for me to remember. It was just, what a waste of life. All those young men. I mean, I was there too. I mean, I was subject to being hurt, killed, whatever, but you're always looking when you see something like that, these poor guys in the Army and Marines who are up there in the woods getting shot at, and all the different types of ways that the Vietnamese they had these bungee holes where they put spikes up, and so if you're walking along a trail, you fall in, all the spikes go through you. It was just, you think back at that. I'm sorry if I'm a little tearful, but it brings back a lot of memories.
Did you keep a journal during the war?
No, I did not. I had a highly classified job, and I was not permitted to save anything or keep anything because at that time everything was either secret or top secret. Today it's not, or else I wouldn't be talking like I am.
What were some of the things you look forward to coming home?
Well, I didn't. Hold on a second. Let me just turn this up. I didn't go home. I went from there, came back, and I came back and got married after I. I was in Vietnam, came back, got married, went back to Vietnam again. Somebody that I had met. So I got married in 3 weeks, and we lasted 17 years. But to answer your question, I went right away. I went to Germany for 3 years.
How was your time in Germany?
That was a great trip. I did a lot of counterintelligence work there, a lot more sophisticated. I did also criminal work there for a variety of different things, whether it was, homicides or other felonies. That's what we did. But that was quite a pleasure after leaving Vietnam to go to a place where you could travel around Europe, which I did, and still do have a great job.
If you could go back in time, what, if anything, would you change?
I would have joined the FBI.
Why is that?
Because for me, it was the challenge. Every time you do an investigation or something and seek the truth, the more you can seek the truth, the better you are. I can tell you I received an Air Force Commendation Medal when I was in Germany because I solved a very large case involving the U.S. The postal system over there. That some guys were stealing stuff from all of Europe would send into this APO address, which was in Rhine-Main, Germany, and these Air Force people were stealing money, and nobody wanted to have a postal case. So, but I decided I was going to do it, and I ended up solving that particular case. As I said, received the Air Force Commendation Medal for that, and because persistence and having talent to interview people to determine whether or not they're telling the truth was a big challenge, and I just loved it.
Did you ever have to lie to people in order to get information?
Do I lie to people to get information? Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. It was permitted. That's what's going on now with respect to the local politics. If the FBI, if you talk to an FBI agent and you don't tell him when you're asked the truth, you could be prosecuted. Okay? What you have to do is request and say that you're not going to talk due to my rights, that I don't have to talk to you. But if you talk to an FBI agent or a government agent and you lie, you're subject to prosecution. But the reverse is not true. An FBI agent can lie, okay, and when that person lies as an agent, we can do that. For instance, give you an example. If you and your friend committed a criminal act, and I could walk in and tell you your friend just said you did it, but if that's not true, now's the time you have to tell me when that never happened.
What were some of the mistakes you made, and how did you learn from them?
Well, I like to think I didn't make too many mistakes, and sometimes you don't know if you make a mistake. But I guess the mistake I made was not going to the FBI. To this day, I regret that. Although I've had a wonderful life on Cape Cod, made a lot of friends. But I don't think I made too many mistakes. I never was given a poor performance report. But again, some of those mistakes, if there are any, were not known because maybe there was another question I could have asked a source, or maybe there was something I could have done that I just don't know that I made a mistake. And certainly I'm sure I did.
How did your time in service affect your life after war?
I don't know. I wish I could answer that question. Again, the only thing I can say, it gave me the experience to deal with people. It gave me some ideas on how to, because I think I would say it this way. I have 3 children who are now adults, and I have 5 grandchildren. I think I could say to them, you don't know how good you have it. Because unless you travel to some of these places, gone to the Orient, gone to places where everything is different than, Europe is a lot like the United States. But if you go to Vietnam or Hong Kong or Thailand and those places, and you see how these people live, and I'm sure there's other poor parts of the country, my children and most other children don't know how good they've had it or have it.
If someone came up to you and was interested in joining the military, what advice would you give them?
I tell them, well, first of all, when you talk to people, you have to know why they want to do something. If the person didn't have a college education, was looking for something to do, I personally believe that everybody should have some government service. But I would certainly, depending upon the person, recommend the military because it does give you a sense of discipline. It makes you equal with everybody else. So if you're some highfalutin guy with a big ego, your ego goes down real fast after they get a hold of you in the beginning.
If you had the chance to serve your country again, would you?
Absolutely.
Now, what are you doing now?
Right now I'm a financial advisor. I'm 77 years old. I don't like to retire because I still do this. And basically I do income planning for people, let's say, over 50 who want to retire.
Do you have any final remarks or advice you would like to give?
Well, that's I guess I don't feel qualified to give advice to anybody, because in my business now, you learn that every person is different. Whether it comes to money and finance, or whether it comes to personality, whether it comes to whether you're happy in your marriage or not, or whether you want to help your kids or not. The only thing I could say probably that I found successful is to listen to other people's problems if possible, and if it's within your power, to try and help them solve those problems, because everybody has them.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.